Hey, Larken Rose here. This one's kind of a tough one. Normally, I talk about principles that are pretty obvious and basic, even though most people have been indoctrinated into statism, so they can't even see simple, basic, obvious stuff. This one's more of a challenge, and it's come up several times recently. To what degree is someone personally culpable and responsible for believing things and doing things that they were indoctrinated into? Now, starting with the extreme version, if somebody is like all the way MK Ultra, like all the way mind controlled, they're a puppet, they don't even remember doing things. If they do something bad while under the control of somebody else, like all the way not aware of it, all the way not making a choice, assuming that's a possibility, would you blame them personally? Would you punish them personally if you find out, oh, well, they were indoctrinated and trained and been through the whole mind control thing to make them do exactly that? Would you blame them for what they did? Probably most of us wouldn't, at least wouldn't all the way. Now, if they volunteered to be part of that program, then that gives them a certain amount of responsibility. But there's a big spectrum between that and, well, what almost everybody does, because almost everybody, their beliefs and what they think and what they advocate is very, very, very strongly influenced by their upbringing and the people they were around. So the context one of the contexts this came up in recently is I made a little post on Facebook pointing out that when I bash the ruling class of Israel and some of the evil crap they do, I make it a point to say I'm bashing the ruling class, not Israel. For the same reason I think it's stupid for people to blame America for what the U.S. ruling class does. Like, well, I live here. Are you blaming me for what the ruling class does when almost everything I do is trying to get people to see that in order to stop that? Am I part of the America that deserves the blame? And then there were comments back and forth and people discussing, well, how much culpability? Some people are like, well, if you pay any taxes, even like in self-defense to avoid getting your kneecap smashed, then you're funding it and you're partially to blame and then people saying, well, no, that's just their upbringing and that's what they think and you don't have a choice about, like, they'll do mean things to you if you don't obey their laws and pay their taxes and stuff. So, but it made me want to make this video because there's actually a bunch to ponder, and the black and whiteness of the issue, it's really easy to make it gray really dang fast. For example, Israel, I could use the U.S. military too, because most Americans go rah, rah, rah for the troops, while the troops are pretty damn often doing heinously evil things and committing murder and terrorism and all sorts of things. Well, the same thing is true of the people in Israel. Most people there were raised to go rah, rah, rah for their little livestock plantation known as Israel, and to feel an emotional, psychological connection to their ruling class and their country and have that all muddled together in their head, where they're just like, yay for Israel, whatever that is. And whatever Israel does, as if a place can do a thing, well, I'm in favor because we're the good guys. You know, it's the same thing that a lot of Americans do. It's less and less now. But there's still a hell of a lot of Americans who will make excuses for anything done by the U.S. ruling class because they associate themselves with America and with the ruling class and with the military and with all that stuff. So they're going to make excuses for it and they're going to go rah, rah, rah. How much does an individual deserve blame for doing that? And there's a few elements. I don't even really have a concrete answer for this, but there's a few elements to consider that I'm going to mention. One is if somebody was factually lied to. Like, I'm sure a lot of people who live in Israel are constantly told, oh, that all the enemies of our beloved representative government, yada, 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 Hamas and the PLO and Hezbollah and like a whole bunch of they're totally all the way evil. Anybody who criticizes us is just evil and doesn't like peace and justice or is anti-Semitic or some damn thing. So that there cannot be any justification or anything to sympathize with or empathize with, even if you think their response is wrong and bogus and immoral. No, they're just all the way evil and we're all the way the good guys, so I'm going to go rah, rah, rah for the human livestock farm I live on and the psychopaths who control it and commit war atrocities in the name of it. So if people are factually lied to and they believe it, I mean, even that you can say, why? How much? Like, at what point can you not really claim ignorance? At what point are you trying to be ignorant? At what point was it not just you were given incorrect information, but you tried really hard to not hear about or see more accurate information? And does that make you more guilty for the evil going on? If it's one thing if you're just factually ignorant, it's another thing if you're willfully ignorant. You tried to not know the whole truth in order to hang on to your beliefs and your biases and all that. But if you're factually lied to and you go rah, rah, rah based on like half decent moral principles, but just a misunderstanding of the facts, to me, that's a lot lower sin. I don't really believe in sin, but didn't know what other word to use. That's a lot less horrible than if you're applying just crappy moral principles and like, yeah, I don't care about those people. They don't look like me and sound like me, so I don't care about murdering them and killing their children and doing all that. So if somebody's factually lied to and then goes rah, rah, rah for something that would have made sense and would have been moral had those facts been true, then that person's only guilty of ignorance and not knowing something true. It's not malice. It's not crappy moral principles or anything of the sort. If they were just factually deceived, and a lot of people are. A lot of Americans were. I was raised to think that the U.S. military spreads freedom and democracy, and they stop the bad guys. That's what I factually believed when I was a young statist idiot, because I got that propaganda everywhere, which, of course, the state constantly does that propaganda. Every ruling class constantly does that propaganda. So I wasn't saying, yay, let's go blow up innocent people at any point. Even in my most statist mentality, I was going rah, rah, rah for the troops and the military because I thought they're just doing good things to fight against super bad people, which is factually nowhere near true, but I thought it was. I was deceived factually. It gets more uncomfortable when you get to what if somebody was deceived and indoctrinated about moral principles that are just screwed up, so that when they say, and by the way, this is something that there's a bunch of people going rah, rah, rah in Israel who make excuses for murdering children in Gaza and other people. Now, it's not everybody in Israel. I don't know what percentage. People show different polls of just how indoctrinated they are. It's pretty damn bad. Wherever the specifics, it's pretty damn bad. Just like it's pretty damn bad here, it might be pretty damn worse over there. So if you get somebody to the point where it's like, oh, that whole people, I don't care about them. Exterminate them all. Kill the children before they grow up to be like... If you are indoctrinating that belief is screwed up and evil. It's also massively hypocritical because there are people on the other side. Now, never mind the history of how the ruling class of Israel basically made most of their enemies, like literally funded and created them, just like the U.S. does all over the place. The U.S. ruling class does all over the place. But so there are people on the other side that's like, we hate, and there are some who all the way say, we hate Jews. Anybody Jewish should be killed. And we don't care about blowing up their children and stuff as long as it serves our overall goal. Okay, you have a shitty moral system and a shitty belief system. The question is, if somebody was surrounded by that their whole life, like their upbringing, they were constantly exposed to that group of people they don't really count as human. You can do what you want, including murder them. It doesn't matter. They're horrible. We're the good ones. We're the ones who have value. They're just evil, whatever. They're basically animals, if even that. Now, sadly, that has not at all been an unusual thing in almost every culture in the world. I mean, in this country, it used to be, oh, yeah, the slaves, they're not really people. I mean, there were legal debates about this. They're not really people. They're animals, if that. But you can own them, and you can whip them, and you can kill them, and you can do stuff. And there might be little punishments similar to if you, like, killed a cow or something. But if somebody was raised surrounded by family members and friends and stuff who believed that, yeah, it's still an insane, evil belief. And if somebody in Israel, or people complaining at Israel, who were surrounded by people who said it's okay to murder their children because that group of people is so bad that it's necessary and it's justified and all that, which you get two huge groups both saying that about each other. If somebody is surrounded by that, are they personally to blame? Now, to some extent, you have to say yes. At some point, if you're actively committing evil and you're trying to do that, the fact that you say, well, I think it's fine, does that make it okay? Now, the most sort of matter-of-fact, practical, rude response I have is if somebody thinks that, then they're a rabid dog and you may have to exterminate them to stop them from murdering innocent people. Whether or not you blame them. And I use that example because a rabid dog, I don't ever blame a rabid dog for being rabid. Don't think any dogs chose that. But if you're now so dangerous and horrible, you're also doomed to die anyway if it's rabies. But if you're so horrible that you're a danger to everything around you, you have to be put down for the sake of everything around you. And the same is true of some people. And it's one of those things where people say, oh, somebody had mental issues. Well, if you run around like torturing and murdering other people as a result of your mental issues, unless there's some really sure way to make you not do that other than killing you, then killing you is still, for the sake of your future victims, a thing that should happen, even if you had delusions and your brain was wired wrong and all sorts of stuff going wrong. Even if there isn't any sort of moral judgment justified, there's still just the practical level of, yeah, but you should be stopped by any means necessary from harming innocents. It's not just, oh, he didn't know he was doing wrong, so we're going to let him keep being murderers, which a bunch of liberal idiots are actually doing to actual criminals. And often, like judges and politicians, often they are trying to create strife and violence, so it isn't even just they're dumb, it's something way more heinous. But I'm not going to get into that side of things at the moment, because there's enough to cover about this thing. So if somebody was raised, let's say we'll make it a hypothetical country because people have their own biases about what they think would happen. And I don't even notice, when it comes to Israel and Hamas and stuff, I rarely cite statistics because I trust them exactly none from either side ever. Because every side in a conflict between people trying to have authoritarian political power, every side is lying their ass off as much as they possibly can to try to make themselves look good and the other side look bad. So I don't freaking know. Now, to pretend, the Israeli government's never done anything wrong, that's fucked up and stupid and ridiculous. From their own, if you just look at their own propaganda, they'll try to spin it away, but yeah, they're doing heinous things. It's sort of like the U.S. military. Well, it was collateral damage, and we're going to spin it and give this bullshit. Yeah, but you admit you're murdering innocent people. Well, yeah, but it's necessary. Okay, then you suck. And I don't have to go to your enemies to find out that you suck. Just the things that you admit to show that you suck and you're doing evil crap. So, but let me use a hypothetical because people have their, when it comes to factually what's going on between the ruling class of Israel and Hamas and what's happening in Gaza and stuff, people can have their factual opinions. Now, some of it is not disputable. Like, if you just look at Gaza right now, is there any amount of, like, legitimate, justified defensive force that would make a place look like that? No, there is not. There's some evil shit going on. And that's true even if there's evil shit going on from other people in the other direction. But the point is not to get into the facts of that, which is why I'm going to use a hypothetical. Let's say two tribes. You happen to be there, and two tribes are just trying to slaughter the hell out of each other, which, sadly, humanity's been doing this to each other for all of recorded history. Probably way before recorded history, in fact. And you're there, and you pause the war for a minute to talk to one side, and you find, let's say, some young kid. He's just big enough to pick up a spear to throw it at the other kid in the other tribe. And he will really and truly believe all those people are horrible and evil. The other tribe is horrible and evil. They do horrible, evil things. We're the good ones. We only ever defend ourselves. So all the factual stuff he's been lied to about. But then he's been taught the moral code, or lack of moral code, that says it's okay to murder them because they're bad. They're inherently bad. It's okay to murder their children and their babies because otherwise they're just going to grow up to be those anyway. So that's okay. So I'm going to make this uncomfortable on purpose because this sort of should be uncomfortable. First of all, would you judge the kid? He's like 10 or something. And he's totally hateful and like, I'm ready to go kill them. Okay, you'd probably have some sympathy for, you didn't really choose this. You're a dumb kid. You don't know what the hell's going on. You've been bombarded with this propaganda and indoctrination your whole life. You're going to think that. That's going to be your attitude. It would be really unusual for like a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old or something to have the mental wherewithal to figure out, I think all the people around me are full of shit. And what they're telling me is totally wrong. Now, I know some people who pretty early on got that feeling. So it's not completely unheard of, but it's pretty damn rare. So I think most of us, we wouldn't really want to completely blame the kid who's like, they're all evil, we should kill them all. It's like, you were taught that bullshit from other people. You don't really know what's going on. You don't know factually, but you were also taught these gross moral principles of like, let's hate this big category and it's okay. Okay, how much would you judge him? I don't know. I don't think any of us would all the way want to say, oh, that's totally your fault. Dumb little kid who is surrounded by people who believe this shit. It's totally your fault that you believed all that. It's all on you. Because almost nobody that young and oblivious they're just mimicking what they see and what they hear. I don't know how to think yet. I mean, most grown-ups still don't know how to think, but kids definitely don't know how to think. Here's the uncomfortable part. If that kid, because of his indoctrination and what he thought, he's about to chuck a spear at a kid in the other tribe, if the only way you could stop him is kill him, would that be justified? I think it would. And it would be absolutely, utterly horrible because you're not even killing somebody who's like fully aware and intentionally malicious and immoral and evil. They're mostly acting on the stupid shit that they were taught by other people, which is why not passing on authoritarian bullshit to the next generation is so massively important. But still, you're not obligated to let him kill an innocent person, another innocent person. And if now, in that case, there would probably be 15 other ways to stop him. But if the only choice was kill him to make that not happen, or let him kill an innocent person, how do you say it wouldn't be justified? It would be absolutely horrible and heartbreaking and tragic in so many ways. Here's the thing. You look at that extreme example, that's only a little bit more extreme than every war that happens, where you have tons of soldiers, a lot of whom are barely mentally more than kids. They're 18 or 20 years old, And in some places you have the child warrior thing where it's like even more heinous. But let's just talk about like U.S. military or like, I don't know how young you have to be to join the war machine of Israel, or any of their opponents, most of which they created. But if somebody's 18 or 20 and they've been fed this bullshit, and they're going rah rah, and they're like shooting at somebody, and I'm in battle, I'm just following orders, you can't blame me. Well, you kind of can. You're doing evil shit. And at what point, at what age, at what level of mental development do we stop saying, well, I mean, that was just your upbringing and what you were surrounded by? And it's kind of I don't have just a line to draw. It's a very uncomfortable question. And what makes it so profoundly evil is that war is mostly a bunch of duped idiots committing mass murder on behalf of evil scumbags who are all the way malicious and evil, but they never get anywhere near the battlefield. They're using mostly well-intentioned people who are indoctrinated and clueless and ignorant and misled in so many different ways to do their bidding. It would be one thing if there was actually like, here's this big gang of literally every single one of them is genuinely evil. Like they're orcs. Like Tolkien had, okay, I'm intentionally going to make, they're just all the way bad. Like in real life, there isn't that. Mostly there's well-intentioned people on both sides of every war. Now, it's usually well-intentioned people plus your facts are way off, and usually your moral code is way off too. In fact, it has to be, because if you'll shoot somebody you know nothing about because the guy above you told you to, that's really stinking bad, and that's everybody in every government military. And it's one of the things that's indoctrinated into every American pretty much. Indoctrination doesn't take in everybody, thankfully. I once took the entry exam. I believe it was at Willow Grove Air Force Base. I barely even remember it. I took the entry exam to join the National Guard. And I went in, I forget, I was just a teenage idiot, still a statist. Rah, rah, rah. I wasn't joining like the real military, just the National Guard. Because I looked and, okay, that's not as, like, sure, send me off to a foreign country to kill people. Now, National Guard is sort of nicer, I'm sure you've all seen the propaganda. So back when I was a statist, I took the entry exam. And I don't remember if they wrote or called me back or whatever, or maybe they told me on the spot. It was so many freaking years. I'm 57 now. It was probably 40 years ago that I did this, if not more. And they said, you did great on the test. You could be anything you want to. You could be like a helicopter pilot and stuff. And I was like, I have no idea what in me shortly thereafter said, no, I'm not going to do that. And it wasn't just, I didn't get around to it or I'm not it. There was something. I can't nearly pretend it was a philosophical principle or a coherent moral thought. But something in my brain was like, no, for some reason. And I think often our instincts know stuff before our intellectual brain does. So I said no. Okay, no big deal. Not exactly a great virtuous achievement to just go, nah, guess I'm not going to do that. But there are lots of people who were given choices, and some of them chose not to be pawns of the state. Now, I'm going to jump to the other extreme. I mean, mine, there was no pressure, there was no anything. I'm not pretending I was so valiant just because I didn't do something I was thinking of maybe doing. Like, whoop-de-frickin' do. At the other end of the scale, damn it, I wish I remembered his name. I should have looked it up before doing this video. One of the most impressive examples, somebody who went through the training, he was indoctrinated into it with the patriotism and the nationalism and the warmongering and all that crap. I'm sure a bunch of you are going to know it, and I will go, yeah, that guy. A guy and his gunmen in Vietnam at the massacre and heinous atrocities happening at My Lai in Vietnam. He planted his helicopter, him and his gunman. He was a medic. But he planted his helicopter between the U.S. troops who were committing mass murder and torture and all sorts of heinous things I'm not even going to mention, and the people of the village. And they turned their guns on their fellow soldiers and said, "You're going to stop or we're going to fucking kill you." That level of strength and courage from somebody who had been through that much propaganda and indoctrination. That is strength. That is humanity shining through the evil bullshit that we're all taught. So it's possible. It's really stinking rare. But if it's possible, doesn't that kind of mean that everybody who didn't do that, everybody who just followed the orders, everybody in that gang of murderous assholes, the troops who were committing these atrocities at My Lai, and that's just sort of one of the more famous examples. It's not like it hasn't happened in a billion other places. If those two could do that, those two could have done it, but they didn't. Which means, yeah, you're personally to blame. At some point, you don't get to just say, well, I was conditioned to believe this, and I was just following orders. And at some point, you're a stinging human being. You have an obligation to judge right and wrong for yourself and do the right thing, even if you've been trained not to do that. But it's a hard question of, well, when is the individual to blame? One of the 8 million projects that I'll probably never get to, is a sequel to my novel, The Iron Web, which starts with the scene. And I'm not going to tell you any of the details, but it deals with the thing of, okay, here's an enforcer of the state who's done a bunch of evil stuff, but he was just mostly following orders and doing as he's told. And if one of his intended victims has the choice of killing this guy who's just kind of an idiot, not that smart, cops are not that smart. In a lot of departments, it's literally a requirement that you not be too smart. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. There were court cases about, we make sure not to hire people whose IQs are above a certain level because we want obedient morons. Because that's what the state benefits from. So if you get this obedient moron, well, I'm here to enforce this, and somebody like, well, my choices are let you put me in a cage when it's not nearly justified, or kill you. I'd like there to be a third option if you're just some duped, indoctrinated moron. But if there isn't, why the hell shouldn't I kill you? You think it's a good enough to go, oh, I'm just following orders, I'm just enforcing the law. I don't make the law, I just enforce them. I don't think or judge anything. Who am I to judge? To pull an Ayn Rand. I just mindlessly do whatever I'm told. Okay, well, then you probably deserve to get shot at some point if you're mindlessly doing immoral crap. So the practical side of, yeah, you don't have an obligation to allow yourself to be victimized. That's one thing. But the main topic of this video is the moral judgment side of the just following orders and just doing my job and just doing what I was told bullshit. When is that, like, that's never a good enough excuse for somebody to, where somebody else is obliged to let you victimize them. Like, screw you, probably shouldn't have stupidly followed orders. But the whole concept of blame, when is it your stinking fault? It's on you. You're a bad person for doing that. And there are a lot of times where it's pretty damn easy to say that. But there's also times, like when you're talking about an example of a young kid, it's like, it gets less easy because how much are you expecting some dumb indoctrinated kid to be thinking about anything like that? And so the question of when is the individual to blame for just going along with bullshit he was taught, it's kind of uncomfortable. Now, at the end of the day, it doesn't change when people have the right to defend themselves. Some well-intentioned, badge-wearing idiot, I'm going to arrest you for having the wrong plan. Well, if you get shot for doing that, person was justified because it's not okay to kidnap someone for having the wrong plan. You fascist dumbass. But it may be a case where I wouldn't have entirely blamed him because, well, all the conditioning, what he was surrounded by, what he always heard, He thought that made sense. He thought that was moral. He thought the law was actually a thing. Most people think the law is actually a thing. It's politician scribbles. It's 100% illegitimate bullshit. It has no effect on morality whatsoever. But almost everybody is taught the exact opposite. Nobody's above the law. What a deranged, demented, idiotic, indoctrinated notion. And I'm about to do a different video about that. It's a universal delusion. It's nearly universal. Not all of us worship the stupid politician scribbles known as law, but a hell of a lot of people do. Well, you broke the law, so here comes the mindless, violent enforcers. Well, if the law had nothing to do with morality and it's going after somebody who didn't threaten anybody or hurt anybody, does that person have an obligation to let himself be victimized? Nope. Does he have the right to defend himself? Yep. Does that mean and include he has the right to kill people trying to kidnap him? Yep. Even if the people doing it mean well and they think they're in the right? Yeah, because thinking you're in the right doesn't mean you're in the right. But it's still sort of uncomfortable. And to not have this video be a 7-hour random pondering, I'll throw in this, because mostly been talking about the enforcers themselves. What about the people who just go rah, rah, rah for it? Like ICE agents do evil crap that would absolutely justify some people shooting them in the head. If you're trying to kidnap somebody because he doesn't have a piece of paper from politicians, like if you're trying to get somebody who's actually like violently victimizing others, okay, well then immigration status is still completely irrelevant. If you're trying to stop an actually nasty person from harming innocents, okay, good for you. If you're kidnapping somebody because they don't have the permission of the ruling class to be on a certain piece of dirt, you're a piece of crap. What if you're just somebody cheering for that or voting for that? Or what if you're somebody cheering for or voting for the war on drugs? Or some war where the U.S. military is doing evil crap around the world? When it's a couple more steps removed, it's like, I'm not doing it. I'm just voting to have somebody else do it. And I see a lot of people, some people all the way say, well, if you voted for this, you're just as bad as the people who did it. And you totally deserve the same damn treatment as they do. And in a whole lot of cases, I wouldn't all the way agree with that. It is one more step removed, or 2 more steps removed, or whatever. But you still bear some of the responsibility. You still bear some of the blame. And that's, to me, that's kind of a tough thing to exactly decide where to draw the line. Like the people who are pro-freedom who voted for Trump, now they're like, oh, golly gee, it turns out he was pro-authoritarian and not against the establishment. Yeah, you dumbass, you bear part of the responsibility for the harm done by your stupidity. But how much? Would I cage somebody for voting for Trump? No. Would I absolutely make fun of them and call them hypocritical, unprincipled dumbasses? Yeah, because they were. Would I cage somebody for being some of the violent thugs that carry out the orders and use violence against innocent people? Yeah, it would be justified to cage them or sometimes shoot them or whatever. But in the in-betweens where somebody was surrounded by this authoritarian bullshit and they just advocate it or they vote for it, it gets more uncomfortable because they're sort of insulated by the fact that they didn't do it themselves. And that's why, to me, one of the most powerful lines of questioning to somebody who's used to having the comfort of I can just abstractly support some damn thing, and the actual violence I don't have to do. I don't even have to see it. It doesn't happen in front of me. I can just describe it in vague euphemisms. We need a reasonable border policy that blah, 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 and I can keep it mushy in my head so I can feel okay about it. That's why, to me, one of the most powerful lines of questioning is, okay, never mind the abstract. There you are. It's just you. You have a gun. You're standing at the border. And all you know is some woman and her baby are trying to walk across, and you know they don't have political ruling class permission to be here. So they're illegals. do you, on your own, by yourself, have the moral right to threaten violence against them, to violently stop them from coming across that line? And making it that real and literal and specific usually makes people uncomfortable because it removes those steps of separation that make them so comfortable being cheerleaders for authoritarian evil, which is true of the left and the right and every voter everywhere and any advocate of any government policy at all, or any tax at all, or any of that. So, and I don't, like, how I function doesn't exactly require deciding an exact line. I don't think there is an exact line of, all right, here's how much you suck if you advocate this much state force. And I say this as a former statist. I would vote for it and rah, 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 Republican. I was already like constitutionalist, libertarian leaning. So I just want people robbed a little bit for like a military and police. Well, that's still robbery. I still would have advocated that my neighbors be forced by way of taxation to fund things that some of them were against. Well, that's bullshit. That was wrong of me. And the fact that I later changed my mind and went, wow, that's screwed up. The fact that I can later see that it was screwed up means it was already screwed up, even when I didn't see it. And at the same time, I changed my mind. It shows people can change their minds. People are capable of escaping the indoctrination they've been put through. Some people are, to some degree. But then the question is, why didn't I escape it earlier? And how much was the former me to blame for not escaping it earlier? I advocated it for a while. It was a very mild level of statism, but it was still statism, including taxation and state thuggery and of some laws that were totally about victimless crimes. War on drugs bullshit. I sort of vaguely thought, oh yeah, drugs are bad, so that must be a good idea. It's just an idiot, indoctrinated kid. But I condone that. I advocated that. When was I suddenly personally responsible for advocating evil? And I don't think there's just a line. But the fact that, yeah, eventually I saw it and changed my mind and was like, that's not okay. That's bogus. I'm not going to believe that, regardless of who around me believes it. And that's pretty unusual. Now, among people who watch my channel, it's probably not that unusual. Probably almost all of you have stories. Some of you have stories where very early on, like way earlier than I ever did, like, this whole thing of authority is bogus. Like, go to school and I have to obey these people. Who are these damn people? I don't even know these damn people. Why do I have to do what they say and sit where they tell me to sit and talk about what they tell me to talk about? Screw this. A bunch of people I know instinctively knew that very early on, way earlier than I ever did. But, so I don't have an answer to this question. But the punchline, the thing I think is worth bringing this up for, is if, as anarchists and voluntarists, we remember how much of the beliefs of all these people weren't their idea. They didn't come up with this. They didn't think things through and decide to be statists. They were just indoctrinated into it. Even the most zealous, frothing at the mouth, bootlicking idiots, of which there are many, and I criticize them and mock them constantly, even they didn't come up with it on their own. It wasn't actually their idea. It was a crappy idea that, yeah, they had to, a certain amount of them had to be susceptible enough that they would fall for that. They had to be able to be enticed by the idea of controlling your neighbor by way of government. It's like the ring of power. It corrupts almost everybody. Yeah, but there had to be something in you with the potential to be corrupted, and that's true of almost everybody, maybe absolutely everybody. But if we keep that in mind when talking to devout statists, that the blame, however much you think that person is to blame, the blame isn't entirely theirs, because massive amounts of effort have been put into training them to think these bullshit things, training them to advocate and condone and vote for authoritarian bullshit. And if we can sort of remind ourselves of that, of and remind ourselves, I mean, it's a big thing I get into in Candles in the Dark. Even when they're cheerleaders of evil and advocates of evil, they're also victims of the authoritarian bullshit they were taught. Same is true in every war, same is true all over the place. So as much or as little blame as you think they deserve, just keeping in mind that they didn't come up with this on their own, and they're actually victims of it, even if they're also perpetrators, all the way up to being actual enforcers, soldiers, cops, whatever. And so, and that's what Candles in the Dark is all about, and it's what The Mirror is all about, which, yes, I've been working on it. I hardly ever mention it because it's a monumentally huge project, and I'm not going to release it till it's all the way done. So most of you don't get to know any of the details. Neener. But both The Mirror and Candles in the Dark largely focuses on finding the good person inside underneath the authoritarian bullshit they were taught, and talking to that, and trying to get that part of them, the real them, before the corruption and perversion and indoctrination, to try to get that part to sort of wake up and outgrow and escape all the propaganda and indoctrination that's made them into bootlicking idiots, just like I was a bootlicking idiot. So anyway, there's some stuff to think about and some stuff to keep in mind when you're trying to talk to statists. And I know it's frustrating, and I know it's tempting to give up. I've been tempted to do that 80 bajillion times over the last... I'm almost coming up on 30 years. It's 29 years since I gave up statism. So it's been a while. But the last thing I'll say is, it's weird because the blame, how much you blame somebody and how much you condemn their particular actions, to me is actually independent of the ways that might still be able to reach them. But you have to get into a different mindset to sort of set aside, yeah, this person may be an evil bastard for what he did or what he condoned or what he voted for, but I'm going to go out of my way to talk to whatever is still in him that isn't an evil bastard. The stuff underneath the indoctrination and all the factual crap he was taught and all the twisted moral principles he was taught. I'm going to see if any of that is still there and try to talk to that to bring it back out. Because I think there's massive value in that, and I've seen over and over again where somebody who is very much a statist can end up being very much the opposite of a statist, and I'm one of those people, and I know many thousands of people who are like that, and I will know in the future many thousands of people who today are devout vocal statists, and in the future will be vocal voluntarists. And that is how humanity evolves into what we should be.